All right, we're recording. All right. Do do do. Hello. Welcome, first person in chat. How's my level on the microphone? Can you hear me okay? Hello. Awesome. Thank you so much. A bit quiet. Let me turn it up a little bit. There we go. I'm ace as hell. I'm so excited. Awesome. I'm glad. I'm gonna give this a couple of. We're technically not quite at start time, so I'm gonna give it like a minute, and then I'm just gonna kind of get going. Awesome. I have been liking the con a lot. It's been a lot of fun. It's been real busy, but it's been good overall. Really cool. A really good time overall. And yeah, we're gonna talk about how to do things with ace characters. Um, So yeah, I got notes and shit. Let me get those up here for myself anyway. All right. Since it is, oh no, technically not 8 o'clock. Oh, now it's 8 o'clock. Um, hell yeah, solidarity. Okay. Hi everyone. My Twitch thing is way behind what's actually going on, so I have no idea how many people are actually watching, but I see a number of people in chat. So let me get started. Okay, so my name is Janaya, or John. I'm a non-binary trans femme. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I am also an aromantic asexual, and I also write a lot of Homestuck fanfic. If you haven't read any of my writing, I am on Archive of Our Own under Alt Universe Wash. That's the tag in the upper right corner of the screen. I have written just shy of 500,000 words of fanfic so far in about 6 months. So I write a lot, and I do like to explore. Thank you for the follow, Keyblade, or Keyblade. I do like to explore various issues that are relevant to me as a trans femme person, as a queer person, as an asexual and aromantic person in particular. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from as far as as far as where I'm coming from on all these issues. And I'm hoping that this will be useful for people that are asexual and maybe not sure how to write about your experiences, or people that are. This will be archived. It will be up on my YouTube channel. Um, or people that are interested in writing more about that kind of rep. Um, so, quick disclaimer. I am trying to help people write better, more accurate portrayals of aspec people. That doesn't mean that every relationship that you write about as an aspec relationship is going to be a positive or a healthy one. I just want you to avoid things like stereotypes or like harmful assumptions about aspec people. So like, I don't think that every relationship you make as a queer person has to be like, perfect. I just think that you should avoid things like bad stereotypes. Um, and here we go. So I have no idea what people's familiarity with this is. I know I've got some aspec people in chat, but just kind of generally, for people that aren't. So asexuality. Asexuality is the lack of sexual attraction. So basically, the lack of a desire to engage in a sexual relationship with specific people. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't feel kind of like general sexual arousal. It doesn't mean that you don't like relationships. It doesn't mean you're a hollow robot who doesn't feel anything. It just means that you don't feel that specific drive, like, oh, this person, I would like to have sex with them. Um, and aromanticism is basically the same thing for romantic attraction. So you may still want a relationship, but you don't really necessarily feel that drive to do romantic things. I find that aromanticism is a little vaguer and harder to define for people. I've gotten a lot more questions about it than I have about asexuality, but it's kind of a you know it when you see it type thing. These are both spectrums. There are lots of identities all along them. There are people that feel like some sexual attraction, but not a lot, or only under very specific circumstances. There's a lot of different subterms. I'm not really going to go into those because I've only got an hour, and I would like to talk about like specific examples. So I'm trying to speed run all the basic definitional stuff. Um, another thing that's really important for understanding this stuff, I think is really helpful in general, is what's called the split attraction model. That is the idea that your romantic and your sexual attraction, and also like aesthetics and stuff, aren't all they're not all tied together. Like you could be romantically attracted to people, but you don't want to have sex with them. You're not sexually attracted to them. You could be like I consider myself an oriented aromantic asexual. I'm pan aesthetic. I think that people can be attractive regardless of their gender. They can look good, but I don't want to do anything with them. So you can have aesthetic attraction. You could have the desire to enter into a hold on, this is a transition. I'm a professional into a queer platonic partnership. What the fuck is a queer platonic partnership? It is basically a relationship that is more intimate than what a friendship would typically be considered, emotionally or physically. But it doesn't have sexual or romantic elements. Yeah, actually, more allegiance. Yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're two slides away from that. So yeah, queer platonic partnership. Keep that in the back of your brain, because I had some thoughts on that. Anyone that follows me on Twitter and actually like reads my many weird Twitter posts may have seen the thing I talked about that about a month ago. Um, and just in general, I'm going to talk more about these things like later on, or am I going to talk about them now? Oh, I'm going to talk. Oh no, I'm going to talk about them more later. But so generally speaking, like, what does bad representation look like? I think like as queer people in general, or trans people, we get the idea that like any rep is good. Like, oh, someone that looks like me, that's great. But it's really easy to write like shitty representation. So what is romance anyway beyond shipping? Interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit. So like representation that's vague or unspecified, where it's not like it's kind of like implied, like the whole Disney does this a lot, where it's like, oh yeah, we've got gay representation. Look, this guy he was dancing with a man in a trailer. They're clearly gay, maybe. So you see this a lot with like the wink nod, like big companies that don't want to lose people that are reactionary. So they do representation that's not really like it's not really there. It's just kind of like trust us, they're definitely queer. Um, Representation that promotes stereotypes, obviously really bad. Like think of all the trans quote unquote rep where it's like, yeah, queer baiting, exactly. All the trans rep where it's like, oh, it's really a man in a dress. Or trans rep where it's a cis actor playing a trans character, or the trans character is portrayed in this really like unflattering light. Um, Things that lean into these kind of stereotypes obviously promote very harmful ideas about queer people in general, which leads me into my next point: representation that's actively harmful. Think like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, like the most disgusting, harmful version of a trans femme person you can imagine. Rep like that, it does a lot to demonize queer people, and it does a lot to, it institutionalizes these really harmful stereotypes. Um, Representation that's insincere or disingenuous. I think this is like, I see this a lot, unfortunately, with Homestuck, where it's like, oh, yeah, we've got representation, but it's not really like, it's not very well thought out. It's not very comprehensive. It's just kind of like, yeah, trust us, it's there. It's kind of like the vague unspecified, but more like, I feel like it's more insidious because it's being claimed as being like good representation, but it's just kind of like, it's not. And I find that you find that a lot with people that aren't like, they're not super familiar with the rep they're writing. Um, it's just a phase representation is real shitty. The idea that being queer is a thing you'll grow out of, that being trans is a thing you'll grow out of. Those are all not great. And the last kind of bad rep, I think, is rep that's confusing. So you've got this kind of like vague representation that you're not sure what it's supposed to be. And actually, we're gonna talk about that with regards to Jake English in a little bit. Um, so just again, keep that one in the back of your mind too. So Homestuck. Let's talk about Homestuck in this Homestuck con that I'm presenting for Homestuck. So the quadrants I think are interesting. I'm not a massive fan of the quadrants, but they're definitely something that influences a lot of the Homestuck writing about sexuality. So the kind of core ones are like the mate sprit, the cosmesis, which are I see as typically being coded as romantic and or sexual. Like there's a lot of romantic and sexual coding. Cosmecitude is like kind of like the hate sex type thing, or like this rivalry that's sexually charged or romantically charged. And mate stripship is pretty like it's hey Momo. It's pretty commonly like mate ship is kind of like your standard, romantic and sexual relationship. Um, but we also have more allegiance, which is really interesting because as an aro ace person, I see more allegiance as being very close to a queer platonic partnership. You have two people or more that are very like intimate with each other. They may have physical intimacy that's more than what you would typically think of in a friendship, and usually have a lot of emotional intimacy, but it's not necessarily coded as a romantic or a sexual thing. Now, I know it gets a little confused because like sometimes more allegiance is kind of like portrayed as a type of romance, and that's valid. Um, in fact, I think you could read it as being a potential way to code a non-sexual romantic relationship. So I think there's multiple readings to it, but it's interesting because it's kind of like I don't believe that Andrew Hussey was necessarily like super up on a spec representation, but it's almost like accidentally stumbling into some pretty good representational framework. And then we have auspiticism, which doesn't really apply because it's more of like an intermediary type thing. Morels are pretty chill, could be cool. Yeah. So sorry, Kanaya, but auspiticism doesn't really come in too much. Um, so one of the things I like to do with writing good, not good aspect rep, that's a typo. Writing good aspec rep is to look at the idea that love doesn't necessarily mean romance and sex. Um, yeah, Jake, we're gonna get to Jake. I'm definitely getting to the example part. Really trying to do this fast, so I can talk about my many, many, many examples. Um, yeah, I know that all the Homestuck um, quadrants kind of like shifted over time, and like they're not always well defined or like rigorously defined. But yeah, I agree. That's definitely that's definitely something to think about. So a lot of the stereotyping involving aromantic and asexual people is that your love isn't real because it's not whatever. So I like to really try to actively portray characters that you missed basic terminology and like definitional stuff. I'm front loading this. A lot of the back end is going to be examples and talking about like details and thought process stuff. The interesting stuff that you all want is like how to write better. Um, but like, so I really try to be very intentional about redefining what love is. So you're not like, oh, love is just romance or love is just sex. Like, you can have love that's intimacy but doesn't involve those things, and like try to portray that in a very intentional way. Um, and I will talk about that when I go into my examples. Um, okay, so hold on here. I've got some notes that I want to go through here. Do do do. And then I'm going to double back to Jake English in a minute. So, I mean, in general, I think being aspec is kind of like being any other queer identity in a lot of ways because you basically, a lot of us are told that our relationships are supposed to be this one thing. You know, they're supposed to be this very like cis heteronormative. You know, you find the one person and you go and you marry them and you have babies with them. Very, you know, broadly speaking, and like any of us that don't feel the same way, we go through this experience where it's like, oh shit, I don't agree with that. And it's kind of weird for aspec people because a lot of us can be like, a lot of us can feel like we kind of just have to fit that model, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess I'm straight. I don't feel that, but like maybe no one does. You know, maybe everyone's just kind of faking it. Um, so you know, you go into a relationship and you kind of get wrapped up in all that. Um, yeah, no, I'm trying to help you out with that. So you know, being an asexual, you don't feel that drive to like go out and have sex with specific people. Being a romantic, you don't feel that drive to like get a romantic relationship. Yeah, it's like proving a negative. Like you know you don't feel a thing, but then you kind of tell yourself, well, like maybe I'm just not supposed to feel that very much. And then you learn, you know, 30 years later that oh hey, there's actually a word for that. And maybe I'm that thing. So you've got this whole like coming out experience, just like any other queer person, where you're kind of like figuring out what you are and like how to define it and what the words are, and you go through all the different, like there's a lot of sub identities, there's a lot of nuance to it, trying to define who you actually are. And that's very interesting in terms of like dealing with relationships, because there are a lot of people that aren't asexual and they may want things out of a relationship that you don't feel comfortable with, um, or that you feel comfortable with, but only under very specific circumstances. Um, so, you know, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, like, why are you doing that? Um, so, you know, it's a lot of this figuring it out, a lot of figuring out how to define relationships. Being aromantic and asexual is even weirder because, like, you're kind of like, what's the deal with relationships generally? But you still feel emotionally close to people because, again, being these things doesn't make you a robot. It doesn't make you an unfeeling, you know, weird entity. You're not a plant. Um, and there are a lot of like people say shitty stuff about who you are as a person. Like people say some gross stuff about all queer people, and that also includes aro ace people. Like all of the yeah. So I've been very lucky. Like the LGBTQIA plus community that I've experienced has been very accepting, but I have seen some shitty stuff. Like I came out as asexual like right when a few years ago when the ace discourse was like the big thing again. Fortunately, I wasn't on Tumblr at the time. Um, but you know, you see that and you see people like they say shitty things. They say, you know, you're just faking it. You just want to be special. You're taking resources away from other queer people, real queer people. You know, you just haven't found the right person. You know, all these just gross things that people say, and you know that gets inside your brain, and you tend to feel bad things. People misunderstand you, misunderstand key elements of your sexuality. They think that you're, you know, pretending. They think that you just have to find the right person. You're broken. Um, the thing is, like, I don't think there's really any key difference between being aro ace and being any other queer identity. Like you're a marginalized sexuality that not everyone understands, and people are shitty to you because of it. Um, and yeah, it's hard to AK Pen, like it's hard to think like how does that feel? And yeah, that's really tricky. Like you have those feelings as an allosexual person, a person who experiences sexual attraction, and it's like, well, how can someone not feel that? And I mean, it's kind of like any other sexuality. You aren't. You're basically just like, hey, you just don't feel those things. And we'll talk about how to kind of like write that in a minute. Um, so I have some stuff in here I want to talk about, some stuff that's not on the screen, but I have in my notes. Um, so a couple of things to think about are sex repulsion is one thing. Aaron. So sex repulsion is when you don't want to have sex with people. Like actively you dislike it. It's disgusting to you. It makes you feel uncomfortable, whatever. Similarly, romance repulsion, where the idea makes you feel like bad. Um, not everyone that's asexual is sex repulsed. So portraying that is a little like it can be tricky. Similarly, portraying a sex positive asexual person or a romance positive aromantic person, like someone who might be willing to get into a sexual or a romantic relationship for some reason that's not sexual attraction. Like, oh, I have this partner that I really love, and I don't hate sex, so I'll do the thing with them because they like it. Yeah, physical pleasure. Um, Wanting to have children, doing it the old-fashioned way. Wanting to like be in a romantic relationship because you are intimate with somebody. Maybe you don't feel the exact same way about them as they do about you, but there's enough common intimacy that you're like, okay, we can do this thing. Imagine having children. I have two children. Um, it's a lot. I'm also old, so. And portraying those different, yes, theoretically. I mean, the general rule of thumb is anything can be anything. But yeah, sex repulsion can be genital based. It can be enhanced by trauma. It can be something that develops over time. Like I am a sex repulsed asexual. I was not always. But I've been through a lot of bullshit, and part of my sex repulsion is trauma based. My asexuality, on the other hand, is not. Um, yeah, exactly. Sex is fine. It's like, whatever. It's a thing. Um, and we'll talk about writing queer platonic partnerships with some like concrete examples. So the other thing, hold on, where the fuck is my mouse cursor? There it is. The other thing here, avoiding stereotypes. So this is a big one. Um, and I'm just going to read verbatim what I have written here because I think it's very prescient and very insightful. Don't imply that being aro ace is somehow being broken, less human or alternian, less worthy, etc. Don't write storylines where anyone is cured of their aromanticism or asexuality. Just don't fucking do it. I will find you and do and scream. So much scream. I will do. Um, so anyway, yeah, there's a lot of bad stereotypes. The you're broken is a big one. A lot of asexual and aromantic people are told that we're broken because we don't like sex or romance. And conversely, we can be fixed by someone. That's a horrible thing to say. That's just like the dudes that say they can fix lesbians. It's not a good thing. Don't even think it. Yes, we will all do and scream. Um, the other big ones that come up are the idea that being aro ace means that you don't feel feelings or that you don't feel anything. I have a real issue where like all of the asexual characters are like, it's like non-binary characters always being fucking robots. You're still human. Robots, bingo. You still feel things. Um, yeah, there's lots of kinds of love, and like being asexual, I care very deeply about my friends. I care very deeply about my queer platonic partner. I care very deeply about my family. I just don't feel sexual and romantic attraction to people. Like I don't have no feelings, and that's a shitty thing to think and say. And like a lot of the idea that the asexual story is like about how to learn to feel again or whatever bullshit. Like just fucking yeah, don't do that. Oh, another big one. So the idea that being asexual or aromantic means that you are celibate or not in a relationship. Um, I like to say that action and attraction are not the same thing. Like you can be in a relationship by choice, even if you don't feel that attraction. Now it might not be great. You might hate it, but it's a thing you can choose to do. Yeah, dating does not change your orientation. I was married for a long time to a horrible person who is horrifically abusive, and my orientation did not change throughout it. Not understanding my orientation caused a lot of problems and stress, and probably influenced me to stay for longer than I should have. But yeah, like you don't just change. Well, that's not true. Some people do. There are people that whose sexuality is fluid, but generally speaking, you don't your sexuality doesn't really change. Although again, not universally true. Um, and just kind of as the bottom line for this with the stereotypes is like there is no one monolithic aromantic asexual experience. Like everyone's experience is different. Like your mine is one thing, and my experience is informed by yeah, ham-fisted representation is definitely a thing. I am going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about it in context of Homestuck, and then I'm going to talk about it in context of my own work. And I wanted to do no more than half of this as like explanation because I have a lot of thoughts from my own writing. Um, so I wanted to get to that. But yeah, like there's no one experience. And if you talk to a bunch of different asexual people, you'll get a bunch of different possible interpretations. If you're really concerned about something, find somebody who is aro-ace and talk to them, or aromantic or asexual. Get perspective on it, and think about it. Like just being deliberate when you're writing is good, generally speaking. That's a big philosophy of mine. It's like if you're going to write something, do it on purpose. And now I've got to scroll up my notes because I have notes about Jake English. I have thoughts about Jake English, and I have things that I do. Okay, so this is a Tumblr post, which I basically just blatantly stole. I was looking for all the sort of is Jake English aromantic stuff in Homestuck, and someone did it for me, and I will steal their work like the filthy communist that I am. So the thing is, I read Homestuck as an archival reader. I read it I read it very quickly. And one of the things so when I played Pester Quest, the Jake English route, it was like, oh shit, he's a romantic. And then people were saying, oh, he always was. And I'm like, what are you talking about? No, he wasn't. So I went back to look at this over, and it was like, this is one of the issues I have with representation that's written in a kind of slipshod way. So the bottom line is, I think Arrow Jake is a good take, but as OG Homestuck put it, I didn't get the sense that he was aromantic, because when I read it as him being just like bad at relationships and kind of like unsure of what he wants to do. Because there's a lot of like, the thing about it that I found confusing was that there's a lot of this kind of like teen relationship drama stuff written over the top of it. And there isn't a lot of very specific like, hey, maybe I'm aromantic. I mean, he does kind of talk about some things that can be interpreted that way. Yeah, Tavares might be. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good read of him. But I mean, as with a lot of things with Homestuck, Homestuck is a very broad work, but it's not often a very deep work as the actual text. Like, it doesn't dig into his sexuality because it's got 50,000 characters and it's got to do all the plot stuff. So yeah, there are like bits and pieces of this could definitely be read as an aromantic character, but like, is it an aromantic character? I don't know, maybe. And like, that's, it's cool to read him as whatever. And I think it's really valid. But also like, it's kind of representation, but it's like representation that we're picking out as fans. So like as an aromantic person, yeah, like I really want to see that representation. I mean, it's like, again, another headcanon, or now is canon. Another piece of Homestuck I love is I love June. I love the story of June. I wrote a very like emotionally personal June coming out fic, as all trans femme people are legally required to do in this fandom. And I really like vibe with that, but I don't believe, like, if you want to go back and say like, well, this could be read as trans femme June in original Homestuck, cool. But to say that it's like canon from the beginning is no. Like, Andrew Hussey wasn't like, yes, this is a trans femme character I'm writing. No, Andrew Hussey was like, okay, I'll make that canon now. And then people went back and read things into it, because that's what you do as someone who's looking for representation. admiration and jealousy is actually attraction. I think it can be, yeah. But there's a lot of like nuance to it, and Homestuck doesn't really do nuance great all the time. I mean, it's going through a lot of material, and it's really hard to write. It's really hard to write nuanced representation when you're moving at that kind of pace. So this isn't like, this is the worst thing ever, but like, I feel like we're searching for a lot of representation. And one of the things I started doing when I was writing is to try to be more deliberate about it. So I'm going to just scroll on my notes here because I'm organized. So as a bit of preface, I meant like I was wrong about myself as a kid. Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm saying you can read a lot of things into stuff. And that's legit. I think you can write better rep than that, but like, hey, whatever. It's what you do when you're queer is you find rep and you make it your own. Yeah, so that's a thing. I think that Stargazer brings up a really good point. Because this is kind of like an absence of things, it's very hard to write textual representation that's obvious, that doesn't feel super on the nose. Like, you can't just be like, this woman is gazing longingly at women and only likes women and they're with a woman, so they're a lesbian. Like, that's great. That's super on the nose and awesome. But, if they're just not like, they're not interested in sex, then they might just not be interested in sex, or it might just not be mentioned in the text. It's hard because writing is already filtering. It's already filtering what you're seeing through this lens. Hold on one second. So we take a drink of water. So you're already filtering everything through a lens of like what you're choosing to show, and there's not a thing for you to show necessarily. So as a preface, when I finished reading Homestuck, I read the epilogues and was not a big fan of them. I thought they were very well written, but I didn't like what they did with the characters. And I was like, hey, I can probably do that. And so I started writing fanfic. And the first series I wrote ended up being this very long set of alternate epilogues. So basically like post-Act 7 stuff. And I went into a lot of like queer identities because I am those things and I wanted to see them explored. So I just kind of started writing and was like, hey, I'm going to do a thing. And I ran with it. And one of the things I came up with was the idea that Jade is aromantic asexual. And I dropped a reference to this in a fic where it's these series where June is pretending to be, she is a therapist. She's like basically acting as a therapist. And there's a line that I put in there about Jade and Terezi had a sexual relationship and it didn't end well. And it's like, it's not really specified why. But she's like, it ended badly enough that Jade kind of like ran away from society. And then a couple months later, I'm like, you know what? I didn't really expand on that, so I'm going to write about it. And so what I ended up doing was writing a story about a sex-repulsed, aromantic asexual, who, falls in love with someone, not romantically, but they're inexperienced in relationships and doesn't realize that, and ends up in a relationship that, I'm going to talk about Yiffy. They end up in a relationship that kind of like, it's one where if both parties were like fully aware of their deal, it would be healthy. Thank you. But like, it's not healthy because fall in love non-romantically. I'm going to get to that. Jade starts talking to Terezi, and she spends a lot of time talking with her, and they start kind of vibing with each other and become closer and closer emotionally. And that's what I mean by falling in love non-romantically is not friends, well, sort of friends with benefits. It doesn't end well. I'll explain. So Jade is emotionally connected to Terezi. So she cares more about Terezi than you would say, oh, I'm just friends with this person. Like, she wants to spend time with Terezi. She wants to be near Terezi physically. She wants to share a space with Terezi, like living with her. She wants to be emotionally intimate with Terezi, um, but she doesn't feel the romance feelings, and she doesn't feel the sexual feelings. However, and this is I was struggling to how to portray sex repulsion. So a lot of the like, yeah, queer platonic, exactly. So there's a lot of like leading up to this where they become, more deeply involved. Let me see if I got a really good like general. It's a long fic, but there's a lot of like little bits where they get closer and closer. Um, I think this one might have some good examples. Uh, yeah. Okay. So a lot of what I did to try to write this is I put a lot of character voice stuff that's like showing uncertainty about. Please let me know if the audio is fucky, and I'll try to fix it. Um, a lot of stuff about the character's uncertainty about her feelings. So, from the chat log she has with Terezi, she's clearly cares about her. She talks about like wanting to go on dates with her, wanting to spend time with her. Um, but then like internal stuff, like here, um, maybe she did have a crush. Maybe she needed someone to love. The feeling didn't sit quite right with her. Something felt off about it in a way that was very hard to define. Kind of getting away of my, kind of getting ahead of myself anyway. First things first, you might want to actually ask where Terezi was planning to stay. The whole sleepover idea was pretty much predicated on her actually agreeing to stick around. So like things like this where you're talking about like the character's very emotionally connected to another one, but they're showing like trepidation, like is that really how I feel? Like I because you've got a lot of social expectations. Jade being someone that's raised in modern American society, even though she's raised in a very isolated environment, might have some of those ingrained ideas. So trying to show that level of like, I don't know, maybe I feel like this, maybe I don't. So like the uncertainty. Um, yeah, stronger than friendship. It's like a greater degree of emotional intimacy, almost like a partnership. It is a partnership. It's where you're willing to like, I would marry this person, but I don't quite feel like the mushy romantic feelings. It's kind of like a best friend. It's a little more. It's really hard to define. Like romance is a fuzzy target, um, and it's not like a clear line. It's not like, hey, you cross the threshold, now you're 100% aromantic. It can have to do with like your feelings about relationships. Um, so yeah, like talking about, are they? Okay, yeah, they are actually on the couch together. Like Terezi's like falling asleep in Jade's lap in this, so they're physically very close. But like Jade is showing uncertainty. You might be. You've stumbled into a queer platonic partnership. Yeah, how you might feel in an arranged marriage. An arranged marriage might be more like, yeah, they did have. We're gonna get to that. I'm just gonna stop trying to respond to chat in real time. So yeah, like one of the things I would advise writing aromanticism or asexuality is like, especially with aromanticism, the idea that, um, like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, make your character have an active voice. That's one of the reasons that Homestuck doesn't do a good job of conveying queer identities. Is that everything is happening from dialogue. We're talking about aromantic asexual Jade from my fanfic now, um, as a case example. So like if you're writing long form non-dialogue based fic, you have the advantage of being able to dig into their head, and so you can say like this is what the character is thinking. Um, you know, Again, when you're dealing with an absence of activity, it's really hard to portray that by just showing action. You can also show that through character dialogue, though. You can have characters expressing, uncertainty. Or hold on, I'm going to go back to the chat. Okay, so this chapter, this is mildly not safe for work. I'm not gonna read through it all, but it's not smut. But this is a character where this is the first time Jade attempts to have sex with someone. She and Terezi have sex. Um, the narrator was able to communicate a character's thoughts. I guess it's just an issue of it not being utilized a whole lot. And I mean, I get it based on the format. But yeah, I think you're correct. I think the narrator was communicating character thoughts, at least sometimes. Um, Homestuck's narrator thing is weird. But yeah, so here, what happens is there's the whole like lead up to the sex thing where they're talking about like there's a lot of boundary stuff, a lot of consent stuff. It's like basically Terezi like, are you sure this is okay? And Jade being like, yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess. Which is again, if you're not really on board with having sex, but you kind of feel like that's what you're supposed to do, that's a thing that you experience. It's like the yeah, I guess, yeah, that seems like it'll be fun. And the reaction afterwards, I think, is important too. Um, Quoting from what I've written, it had felt pretty good, actually. Not what she expected. Not the mind blowingly different experience that some of her friends had maybe led her to believe it would be. But Terezi had been sweet and kind and understanding and patient. And when Jade had eventually called it an early night, Terezi had stopped right away. And they got dressed again, and Terezi held her for a while, and then Terezi had fallen asleep. Jade, however, had not. She had, in fact, sat there and stared at the ceiling for 3 hours. Why did I do that? She had been curious to try it out. She had tried it out. Why does it feel like this? Like what? Like she was taken advantage of? No, Terezi was so sweet. I couldn't have asked for a better first time. Except I didn't like it. It felt weird and kind of off, sort of. Gross. A little bit. Just like, I don't know, like it wasn't worth it. Yeah, Southern Jade is my headcanon. So yeah, like here again, trying to be very intentional about what you're writing. Like, okay, this is an internal dialogue. Like the experience of like, okay, I tried this thing and I kind of didn't like it, and I expanded on this more in the story where she's talking to June as like the therapist, where she's like, this made me feel gross, and even though my partner was good, I still felt gross at the actual action of it. And that's the thing about sex repulsion is it's like, it's the actual act of sex that's repulsive. It's like, I don't want to do this. It's not about the person. It's about the actual action. So again, like just the idea that you're trying to intentionally show these experiences. Like they're very vague, kind of hard to define things, but like, okay, this character is thinking about these things. Maybe they're not talking about it, but they're actually going to like have these conversations. Conversely, okay, no, that's for later. An example of something that's like very, very on the nose. Queer platonic partnership. It's the word queer, the word platonic, and the word partnership, or the word relationship. A queer platonic partnership or queer platonic relationship. I will put that card back up later. So another thing you can do is, if you want, and it's appropriate for your text, you can be super blatant about what you're talking about. Exactly. It's what you do within it, and then how you feel about it. So this is a follow-up to Terezi as an asexual, as a non-sex repulsed asexual, who's in a relationship with Vriska and Rose and Kanaya, because someone suggested to me that might be a neat ship, and that's how you get me to write 20,000 words about it. And so like in the fic before, Terezi comes out as asexual, and she talks about it, and she talks about like, she's very like, I'll read the passage here. So she's talking to Rose, and she's saying, I've never exactly told anyone about this before, but she stopped, and Rose could have sworn she heard a tiny sob. Terezi was tensing up again. I don't really care about the physical stuff that I do with Vriska. The sex and everything, mostly. I love being close to Vriska. I love spending time with her. I even love holding her and kissing her, but I think I mostly do that other stuff because she likes it. And I like that she likes it, but I don't get it like she seems to. It doesn't make me feel bad. Shit, it feels pretty damn good. Just doesn't really feel like something I need, like I'm supposed to. So, again, like, Thank you so much. Yeah, like the idea that, oh, this is something that I don't mind, but it's not like great, and you can use character voice to. Yes, I do read. I read fiction on Sunday on this channel every Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Promotion. But yeah, so like the idea that the character can be very upfront about their experiences, like you can use the fact that like, oh, we're having a moment now to actually have your character talk about something in an open way. Like it doesn't have to be all subtext. It can be like, oh, hey, other character, I'm feeling this thing. Like, I mean, that's a thing that real people do. You talk about your experiences. You talk about like, oh, how does this make me feel? Now this is led into like there's a whole buildup of the relationship between Rose and Terezi and Vriska and Kanaya and this whole big thing. So this is like, I don't know how many chapters into this fic is this. This is chapter 9 out of a fic that's like 12,000 plus words. So, you know, you may have to spend some time building up the character relationships, and then you can have them have like the moment where they talk about this thing. And then the nice thing is once you do that, you can be really blatant about it and just like introduce terminology if it makes sense. So here we have this is Vriska and June talking.
So, I looked up asexual on the Carapacian internet. Rose told me that's the human word for what Terezi feels. But they have a really shitty selection of websites. All I found was a site that said asexual is a thing that humans do sometimes. What the fuck does that even mean? Why don't you just ask Terezi how she feels specifically? I did, but also, I wanted to be supportive and help her feel accepted. I thought maybe other people feel like that, but I don't think the Carapacians think of sex the same way.
So yeah, like again, like if you've made the establishment, can I DM you a quote? Oh, that's another for another person. So like if you've already established like kind of the subtle aspects of it, you can have characters have conversations that have like actual like you can drop terminology, like make up why it makes sense. Vriska looked it up on the internet. She didn't get a good response, so she's asking for more information. Like you do have to justify it as a writer, like just throwing it in there doesn't necessarily make sense. It depends on what the character would know. So like a character that's done some thinking and knows what the word asexual is might be like, hey, I think I'm asexual. I think I'm aromantic. But that doesn't necessarily make sense. Like again, Terezi coming out, she's coming from a different culture that doesn't use the same terminology. And she's just coming out. So she might explain it in terms of like, this is how I feel, rather than like, oh, I know this word for what I am. So like again, deliberation is your writing. You know, you understand kind of the basics of what this feels like, or you can ask. Thank you so much. Or you can ask someone who feels like that, like, hey, asexual friend, how does this experience to you? What was it like coming out? You know, you can get a lot of that lived experience. The other thing I find very difficult to write about, and I think it's interesting to talk about, is the idea of writing these kind of queer platonic relationships that are not sexual and not romantic, and like how to differentiate them. The fic there is they all live here now. I will put my AO3 is the name that's in the upper right corner of the screen. Alt Universe Wash, and it's that one is they all live here now. The case files of June Egbert. I'll tell you the names of all of them when I'm done. You're welcome. So hold on one second. I need water. I am thirsty. There we go. So writing a non-sexual, non-romantic relationship can be hard to portray because again, like it just kind of feels like a like maybe like a romance light or like a you know, safe for work romance, whatever. So I think it's important to establish that yes, this character is asexual, and this like one of the things I wanted to do is I have a Jade, Arrow Ace Jade, and probably demisexual Aradia in a queer platonic partnership. So let me read this little quote here. Jade,
Have you ever gotten to the point where you just believe that how you feel is innate? That you are just fundamentally meant to feel like that forever? Yes, I have. That is how I feel, all the time. Would I like to make some friends? Yes, of course. But who am I going to befriend at this point? I feel as if everyone's moved on beyond where I am. They see me as an obligation to talk to. I've already fulfilled my purpose, so why waste their time and mine? I'll go on a date with you. Date? Stupid Briska words. I mean, I'll go hang out with you. Sorry, Briska called it a friend date, and I guess the term stuck. That would make me happy. I would like to do that very much.
And like, so what I did was I established them basically like they talk a lot about being together in a way that suggests intimacy but isn't specifically romantic and isn't sexual. So like showing them, yeah, the friend date thing. They talk a lot about like how they feel about each other. Jade says you're fun to be around, Aradia, and like they're talking a lot about their date and all that. They're shown holding hands. Like little things like that. The other big example I wanted to talk about is from my super long and awesome fic, Plasticine Soul, which is a cyberpunk story, which is not primarily about relationships. Thank you. But one of the things I went on was, one of the things I did with this was the idea of, it's 136,672 words. Yeah, it's a novel. I wrote it in 2 months. I write very fast. But one of the things in here is I have Kurlos. It is literally a novel. It's not even a short novel. It's a fairly long novel. It has Kurlos, it has Mulin, and it has Matuna as a queer platonic like triad. So I did a couple of things to establish this. One is I spent a lot of time establishing their background. So like they were very closely connected. In this AU, they're all like, it's a lot. It's hard to explain. It's a cyberpunk AU. Mulin is former army. Matuna's former fleet. Kurlos is former weird religious cult thing. And they all bond very closely over like shared trauma. So there's a lot of like emotional stuff where it's like these three are really close to each other. It's also made very clear that they have sexual and romantic relationships with other people. Matuna and Latula are in a relationship, and Mulin is in a relationship with a bunch of people. She's probably aromantic. She's not asexual though. Cool. I'm very proud of it. I'm very happy with how it turned out. So there's a lot of like that kind of establishing like, oh, these three have a really intimate relationship emotionally. Like they're always shown to be consistently emotionally intimate. And then they're also shown to be physically intimate, but in a way that's not sexual. So there's a lot of like, like putting their hands on each other, like touching each other, but not like in a sexual way, or like, putting their hand on the shoulder, but in a really supportive, like intimate way. Hugging, a lot of hugging, that kind of stuff. And this is all background. Like this is not a relationship story primarily. It's a cyberpunk story that goes through like a whole shitload of stuff. There's a couple of relationship subplots. That's one of them. But I wanted to try to show like enough representation to make it clear that this is not a romantic or sexual relationship without it being like right out there with the terminology, because this is also set in Alternia where they don't use that terminology. So really, like, I don't know that I 100% succeeded. I might have fallen into the not quite enough obviousness end of things. But I think it's genuine enough that it kind of comes across. So yeah. Let me get the names of all the fics. If you're interested, the fics that we're reading, we have Plasticine Soul, Falter Once More. That's the Jade and Terezi one. Yeah, Alternia. This is an alternate universe Alternia, so it's a little different, but it's still very much like, yeah, it's kind of like that. Sweet, thank you so much. Yeah, the further exploits of Dr. June Egbert, MD, PhD, Esquire. The case files of Dr. June Egbert, MD, PhD, Esquire, Volume 1. And they all live here now. So those are the fics. Let me see. Do I have an end card? I do have an end card. But yeah, generally speaking, so I guess if I were going to do my... I'm going to put my end card up now just so everyone can see it. If I were going to do my kind of like elevator pitch for how to write decent aromantic asexual representation, it would be deliberate about what you're writing. Think about what people are going through. Think about what it means to be aromantic or asexual, and then convey that in your writing. Have them think actively about it. Have them reflect on how they feel about relationships, how they feel about sexual relationships, how they feel about the physical activity. Showing examples where people are like, oh, I did this thing and here's how I feel about it. Or having like people that are like, oh, well, I'm in this marriage, but I just feel like I'm doing it for whatever reason. Like I'm just doing it to have children, but I never wanted to be married. I never wanted to be in a relationship like that. You can go and you can have your characters think these things. They can say it in dialogue. They can come out to other characters. They can say things in one part of the story that are vague and not like super obvious, but then become clearer later in the story. Like you kind of want to like, you approach this with the idea that you're going to write this character like this, and you plant little seeds in the beginning, and then, More Allegiance, I think, maps very well onto Aro-Ace relationships. You can't write headcanon, the trolls at Aspect. I mean, so my general attitude towards people that tell me I can't write things is, fuck you, yes I can. I write what I have experienced and what I believe in, and if you don't like it, I'm writing for free. You don't have to read it. I think it's important that people have representation. So, yeah, I mean, like, if you want to get into the technical details of it, I mean, compulsory sexuality isn't sexual attraction. It's just compulsory sexuality. Like, it's not something that you're like, oh, I headcanon Terezi as ace. In my mind, Terezi is a romantic, asexual, not sex repulsed. That was one of my examples. So yeah, I don't think that it's right to say like, oh, you can't do this. Like, what? That's stupid. You can do what you want. You can play around with the idea of what alternia means, and like you can look at the canon text and be like, well, I feel this thing about it. I'm gonna write about it. Like that's completely valid. If you want to give people representation, you don't need permission from somebody to do it. Like, fuck it, just do it. And I think the key thing is to make sure that your writing is deliberate enough that it's obvious what you're doing. It doesn't feel like you're just like, I have this asexual character because I said they're asexual, and then I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Yeah, it's good head-in-hand because you're ace and you like her. Fuck, yeah, exactly. You can explore it as much or as little as you want. Like, you can go and you could write a whole fic about someone's sexual identity, or you can include it as a background detail. But it should be something that you've thought about in advance. So yeah, that's my basic gist of it. I think that it's important. I think it's just as important as any other queer identity, and I think that whatever your headcanons are, whatever you want to write about, that's valid. Like we're all doing this for free. We're doing this because we like the work in some way, and we want to see representation for ourselves or for other people that we care about. So yeah, that's the thing. I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to do blatant self-promotion now. I'm on Twitter as AltUniverseWash. I post a lot on Twitter, not only about Homestuck, but a lot about Homestuck. I'm on AO3 as AltUniverseWash. Janaya commercial. Yes. I'm on AO3. I have a lot of writing of varying types. I write in a lot of different genres. I have relationship fic. I have weird time travel shit. I have a long cyberpunk novel. I have a bunch of crime noir fics that feature Jane and Terezi. Those are fun. You're welcome. I do a lot of projects. I do some voice acting. I do some writing a little bit for different projects, different zines and stuff. I would like to promote one specific thing, which is a project that I am working on that has just opened up for writer applications and artist applications, etc. It is called New Game Plus. It is being why are we not doing this? I'm sorry, it's not allowing me to copy paste. It's called New Game Plus. It is HS New Game Plus on Twitter. It is a visual novel in the style of Pester Quest that will follow up after Act 7. Thank you, Bucky, for putting that in the chat. Go there, sign up. I'm a writer for the project. I think it's going to be really cool. We're definitely looking to have a diverse writing team and portray a wide range of experiences. And we're looking to portray it in a very genuine way. So, yeah, if you're interested, especially if you're of a marginalized group of any kind, please consider signing up. I am not going to say who I'm writing for. It's a secret. I don't know that we've actually discussed that being a secret, but it's a secret. So I am writing a route. I will not say who right now. I'm glad that you all enjoyed it. Please check out my writing if you're interested. I crave that sweet, sweet validation that only your comments and kudos can give me. I hope this was at least somewhat informative. I will be putting the... Thank you so much, Momo. I will be putting my recording of this up on YouTube shortly for everyone to peruse at their leisure, or if you missed the beginning of it. I hope you've all had a great con. I've had a lot of fun. There's still a few things to go. So yeah, check out the rest of the panels. Check out the rave. Go chat with each other. Have a great time. I'm really honored to be here as part of SAHCon. And I appreciate all of you coming and watching. I am absolutely floored. This is like 20 times as many people as I normally have listening to me talk. So you are all the best, and I really appreciate it. And I really hope you enjoyed yourselves. So please go enjoy the rest of the con. I think I'm about talked out for right now. So thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you have a lovely evening and a lovely rest of the con. Thank you so much. Bye.